there are some sessions yesterday they did that, but it's up to you. Would you want me to come back around here, except you used to come? Here is your right. He's just to He's just sitting there. Yes. Okay. Maybe you should go there. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this incredibly diverse discussion on the role of stakeholders in implementing decarbonization for design to operation in the building sector. So this discussion is going to be in two parts. The first part is going to be predominantly speaking to government and policymakers. And then the second panel will be the various stakeholders, private sector, and the role of activism as well in that, and the thought processes that go into it. The first session will explore the role new buildings play in supporting low carbon and resilient development. And the panel will explore the context of emerging and developing countries, delve into the strategies for achieving zero emissions in resilient building, and how public and private procurement can drive this. And we're looking at the business case for net zero, the social impact and the benefits of these buildings, and ways to lower the cost. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sara Al-Battuti. I'm an architect. I'm a senior advisor to the Egyptian president on climate and resilience, and I am also a global ambassador with the UNFCCC and the founder and architect of eConsult. And I'd like to invite my speakers. I'd like to welcome Mr. Lothar Fen Christas, the Deputy Director General of the Federal Ministry of Housing, Urban Development and Building in Germany. His Excellency Minister Squala Celestin, Chief of Urban Planning Sector in Côte d'Ivoire. Mr. Emmanuel de Lanversin, Deputy Director for Directorate of Housing, Urban Development and Landscape in France. The Deputy Director of He's here. Dr. Ibrahim Abdel Khaliq, Assistant Minister of Technical Affairs from Egypt. And Mr. Mateus Simoa, the Vice Governor of Minas Gerais, the state of Brazil. So we have a couple of questions lined up. Can you hear me? Yeah. So we have a couple of questions lined up, and by no means are they simple questions. They're quite substantial, but I will ask you to stick to the 5-minute intervention. And let me start off with Mr. Lothar. I wanted to ask you, how do you achieve and scale up zero-emission buildings, embracing resilience, and how can public and private procurement drive this change? And of course, what is the business case for near zero and resilient buildings and their social benefits?
Dear Sarah, dear colleagues, I thank you for the opportunity to give a short insight to German efforts to combating climate change within the construction and building sector. The production, the construction and the maintenance of buildings, as well as the use and demolition of buildings, demand a great scale of resources, contributing to the generation of waste and cause major environmental impacts through greenhouse gas emission. So what the current measures in Germany and what are the current measures in Germany and what are our plans for the future? The legal basis for new buildings in Germany is the Building Energy Act. The Act contains mandatory requirements concerning the energy efficiency of buildings as well as the use of renewable energies in buildings. The current requirements for new buildings are: a new building must not exceed a certain amount of primary energy per year for heating, hot water, ventilation, and cooling. So it's the aim is reduce the standard energy consumption to only 55% what we had like 20 years ago. New buildings must meet a minimum requirement of energy performance of the building thermal envelope. A minimum percentage of renewable energy is obligatory to heating, domestic hot water and cooling. It's 65%. The mandatory legal requirements are complemented by federal funding. There is a program, I don't read the German out loud, it doesn't help you, most probably. Bundesförderung für effiziente Gebäude. Okay. You understand? Okay. The abbreviation is BEG, okay? To put it down. That funds measures for modernization of existing buildings, like a replacement of the heating system, modernization of the building envelope, or complete modernization of the building as an entirety. It helps improving the building stock in the respect of energy efficiency and renewable energies. The building stock obviously is key. We are in the new build meeting here, but the building stock is existing to 100%, and we tend to build like 1% per year new buildings. So leaving the building stock aside won't get us anywhere. So just for covering the full picture. But now continuing with the new buildings. We also financially support the climate-friendly construction of new buildings that exceed the legal standards. So funding means exceeding the legal standards. Klimafreundlicher Neubau. You asked for the German terms. Also, the construction industry was quite critical in the view of the high standards when we started that program last year. The program has been a very successful one. In 2023, about 50,000 flats were built with a very high efficiency standard funded by this program. And in 2024, we pretty much expect the same. This shows that the construction industry, the value chain companies are already fit for meeting high standards. Still, we have to consider that greenhouse gases emissions are not only produced in the operation of buildings, but also in the construction. Thus, an important guideline for us is the life cycle assessment of buildings. For new buildings, we set requirements that are neutral to the use of specific materials and technologies. The key issue is performance. For example, with respect to greenhouse gas emission. Against the background of the life cycle analysis, the players along the entire value chain are encouraged to contribute their ideas on how to achieve climate neutrality or how to optimize material cycles. So this is a circular economy. That's another dimension I'm not dwelling so much on, but it's important too here. Thus, Germany is creating demand and also a supply of building products with low greenhouse gas emission. So getting demand and supply together is key in this. In order to define sustainable buildings, we have developed a quality seal for sustainable buildings, QNG. That's German. The quality seal QNG establishes a general understanding of sustainability and a reliable legal basis for the allocation of subsidies. With QNG, sustainability can be measured, optimized, and ordered. So you have a standard, you can put it in the bidding process, you want to have this and that standard, and so you have a clear reference for that. The objective is to establish the goal and principles of sustainable planning, construction, and operation in the German construction and property industry. So the property is the owners, of course. If somebody wants to, we want to order somebody something, we need to address the owners. So what are our aims in the future? In recent years, the main focus has been on reducing CO2 emissions and energy consumption of buildings throughout the use of technical systems. But these attempts fall short. We must rethink strategies concentrated on technology.
Briefly, thank you very much. Thank you. And Your Excellency, Minister Koala, I'd like to ask you, how do you see the deployment of low-carbon buildings in Côte d'Ivoire? And also, how do you move from the scale of the pilot project into a more strategic, visionary approach within the sector for this? And if you can elaborate with examples, that would be great.
Okay. Thanks you very much. I want to, first of all, Madam, to apologize for my bad English because we are Francophone. So my English is not so good, but I will try to explain our ideas. The first things to know is that in many countries in West Africa, I mean Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, Togo, etc., there is now many projects of housing, and it is big project. It means something like 5,000 houses, social and economic houses, 10,000 social and economic houses, and especially in our country, in Côte d'Ivoire, we need to build something like 150,000 houses for the 5 years we are coming. And at this time we are talking, we built something like 30,000 houses. It means that the problem with climate, the impact of those buildings we are realizing in the climate is very important. So in this way, we understand that some things like to build under the town, it means to build around Abidjan, for example. We are taking many lands, agricultural lands, to build those programs, because I'm talking about something like 200, 300, 400 hectares where we are building those houses. We are conscious of something like the problem of climatization, the building. We have some problem like the material, the process to build all those houses. So we are conscious that all these had a real impact on the climate. So what we do now, what we are doing now to try to reduce the impact of those buildings on the climate. First of all, we have an obligation in our programs. We oblige the promoters to take 5% of the land of a program, of a housing program, to reserve to green space, for example. It means garden or a place of playing, etc., something like this. Is the first thing we do. The second thing I think which is more important too is the studies. We oblige in Côte d'Ivoire the developers, the promoters, to make environment studies, impact studies, before building the houses. And after, we have to follow the realization of a recommendation which is in this study, to be sure that the study we make to reduce the impact of the building on the environment, they take it. This is what we do now. But for the 2 or 3 or 4 years which is coming, our intention is, for example, to support the promoter, because when Côte d'Ivoire, the state of Côte d'Ivoire says some developers to build, for example, 10,000 houses, they have some facilities. So what we want to do now is to encourage more the promoters who will build these houses when they take in consideration the question of the climate, the question of the impact of the building on the climate is what we want to do. The second thing I think which is very important that we can do is the permits of building. We'll oblige the promoters, the developers, to integrate the question of climate in the programs of housing before we deliver the permit of building. I think that if we arrive to do this, it can be very interesting for them. The first thing I think which is very important to us in our countries is not to build around the town, but in the town. I'm talking about the question of density. Because now in many of our countries, when we want to make the program of social and economic houses, we do it around the town. It means 200, 300 hectares around the town. I think that this have a real impact on the environment. So what we decide is to build in the town. In the town, we cannot have 200 or 300 hectares, but we can have, for example, 5 or 10 hectares. In these 5 or 10 hectares, what we can do is to build with density. It means 200 or 300 housing per hectare. It can be for us a solution in favor of the climate. And the last thing I think we can do is, for example, to try to oblige the promoters, for developers, to do 10% or 15% of green space in the housing program, because now it is 5%. So I think that if we oblige the promoters, the developers, to do something like 10% or 15%, I think it can be more interesting.
Thank you very much.
But the last thing, in one word, is to say that we cannot follow the European countries on this question of climate. We cannot follow. I mean, with the same. We cannot go so fast. We cannot go so fast as the European countries. We'll do it. We understand. We understand it's important to do it, but we need to go slowly, to our rhythm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks, madam. Thanks.
I'll move quickly to Dr. Ibrahim Abdel Khaliq, and you're the Assistant Minister of Technical Affairs in Egypt. How do you meet the demand for housing while ensuring that housing is affordable, zero emissions approaches, and also it's resilient?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the French government for inviting us for this important forum and welcome everybody. Actually, this question is quite difficult to be answered because we need first to understand how the problem is in Egypt in terms of size. So for housing in Egypt, every year Egypt has an increase of population with about 2 million inhabitants. So this requires 400,000 units per year. So if we plan for 10 years, so this means we need 4 million units. In the same line, we already have the similar problem in any countries that buildings are the main consumer of energy. So the question is how to make the balance between social and environmental objectives. Already we have five actions that the government have been taken into consideration. Quickly, we have passive energy, incentives, partnership, code, institutional setup, and capacity building. So I will try my best to cover all of these actions if the time is available. So regarding the passive energy consumption, because usually energy consumption in building relating to cooling energy in Egypt. So Egypt revisiting the urban form of building and for the new residential projects by reconsidering about the size of building material, orientation, size of green spaces, etc., in order to minimize the impact of the environment and to improve the thermal comfort of building. So this kind of interventions reduce between 10 to 20% of the consumption with no cost. So this is a minimum interventions in order to have a successful solution. This is at the building scale. For at the neighborhood scale or at a city scale, we already invited a number of policies and actions such as urban compactness and land use policies in order to look for the energy efficiency not in the building alone but for the urban environment as well. The second action, which is incentives for private sector, because private sector can lead the market to gradually change to be green and sustainable building. So the incentives from the government to the private sectors by give the private sector some incentives in building regulations, such as increasing of the built-up area, increasing of the footprint, increasing of percentage of spaces. So it's a kind of a win-win situation. So the private sector take advantages from these changing and these incentives of regulation, and at the end, this is a kind of encourage private sector to move to the green cities. The third action, which is a public-private partnership for the green sector. The Ministry of Housing and Government has a number of public-private partnership housing projects, and most of them have been constructed to reduce emissions. The fourth, one left. The fourth action is as a capacity building, because you need to change the mindset of people, the mindset of the decision maker at the first. So it's another important point. Finally, we need an institutional setup in order to monitor the problem and also to assessment these interventions that have been taken in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I want to ask Mr. Emmanuel de Lanversin, as the director of the Directorate for Housing, Urban Development and Landscape in France, what is the role of procurement to accelerate the transformation, and also with respect to technical offers?
Thank you. First, I have to apologize. I have no voice anymore for 1 month, so I'll do my best. By chance, we have microphones, so it helps. The quick answer, I would say, is innovation. Of course, the first role of public procurement is a financial role, is to secure the way the public money is spent. But behind that, for many years now, we added some conditions. And regarding the subject we're talking together about, it is innovation, because the quality of buildings, private or public, is mainly ruled by norms and rules. But in France, we have a new one called RE 2020. It took time to write it down. And of course, we could not write it down alone, and we needed a lot of experiments. These experimentations were run through sometimes public procurement, sometimes with public buildings, sometimes with public development companies that could go further than the normal rules and try to make some implementations. I can take an example, for instance, because I have here someone who is specialist with wooden construction. It's pretty difficult to build wooden high-rise, and because we face some complexity, for instance, with fire safety and mixed usage. So we decided in different places in France to make some experiments. So we made a specific law to allow to go beyond the normal rules and to make some experimentations to see if some solution could work. It takes time, several years, but afterwards we can change the rules and improve our rules, and even set the rules in a timeline. Say there's a new rule for 2040, and in 2034 there will be another one, and in 2040 there will be a new one. So that allowed different companies, developers, builders to program their work. And today, some people, they have private procurement with the rules of the future, because they know it takes time and they have to be ready and make the experimentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Mateus Simoas, the Vice Governor of Minas Gerais in Brazil. I want to ask you about what role do you see in reducing embodied emissions of the supply chain playing in your governorate, obviously, and what are the policies that you have towards implementing efficiency and decarbonization, and what is the resilience strategy that you have? Thank you.
Merci. Bonjour, messieurs, dames. Of course, I will speak in English because my French just go to the bonjour, messieurs, dames. I want first to point out that Minas Gerais is a state, inland state in Brazil, size of France, 23 million people, 20 million of them living in cities. We are not in the Amazon region. By the way, we are as far from Amazon as France are from Russia. So that's important to point out every time. First, I would like just to say something about procurement. As we had put out our action plan as a Race to Zero effort in the last 2 years, it became clear for us that specifically in what concerns energy efficiency and consumption of energy by the government, it's very important to follow renewable energies as a main drive of all government decisions concerning the carbon zero race. We are the largest photovoltaic producers in Brazil. 97% of our grid from renewable energy right now, but we know that we have to make to 100% and make it not an option, but only way to do it. But as we are the largest producers of steel and cement in Brazil, we decided to work towards the value chain of the construction industry and working with the steel manufacturers. We had put out a strategy of making more than 50% of all our steel from scrap. We have this case study of Gerdau, that's one of the largest steel producers of Brazil, one of the largest of the world. And they are producing in Minas Gerais more than 70% of all their steel from scrap. And they are not using any energy that's not from renewable sources. And that makes a huge impact in our economy. You have to see that the name of our state, Minas Gerais, it means general mines. So we are mainly a mining state. But even though we were able to do that. On cement, the challenge is a little different. You all know that we have to substitute clinker. I know that Hossein will be here to talk a little later. We are in a huge effort with our cement industry in Minas Gerais to find alternatives. And we are putting a lot of money in research, developing completely substitution of clinker through the years, but as we get there, doing it one step at a time and seeing what we can put with clinker to use a little less clinker and go a little further in the neutralization of the carbon on the cement industry. But that's not possible if you do not talk with the stakeholders. And I finalize pointing out that when we put it together, our climate action plan, we decided to do it in a very different way than I see my fellow governors doing around the world. We decided to set together with the Federation of Industry and with the Federation of Agriculture. And we signed a contract with them. We did not put the goals for someone else to pursue. We discussed the problem, and together we decided what could be imposed to the society. I'm complaining a little about how the whole discussion of climate has been happening in the last 20 years. If you do not consult the ones that will have to do the job, as nations sometimes do not consult the subnational entities, and as governments did not consult normally the private sector, the work will not be done. We have to work together, because that's not a task for the government, or for the nations, or for the UN, or for the companies. That's a problem of humankind, and we have to deal with it with that drive. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's been very diverse, but I'm going to try and sum up before we open up to the Q&A. And, you know, it's like hearing different perspectives from management perspective. So if we talk about Mr. Lothar, you were really sort of setting standards and creating this base case. And I think accessibility for these standards are very important when you were talking about the materials and the technology. And then moving on to Your Excellency, you were talking about, you know, very large scale, but also the sense of implementing accountability. So you have obligation, but you also have commitment right there. And this is very necessary when you're dealing at the government level and strategic implementation. And then with Mr. Emmanuel, you were talking about innovation. And this is something that is extremely important to understand what are the innovations that are out there that we can consolidate and work with, you know, because without innovation and without the results of the innovation, it's very difficult to get the financial sector to back much of what we're doing. Dr. Ibrahim, investing in people and, you know, gathering investment ideas not only comes between paperwork and contractual agreements, but also capacity building, convincing people to join in, approaching the private sector and seeing how you can develop these partnerships is great, because it brings us all back to a very good conclusion about how you can take an industry, with what you were saying, Mr. Mateus, an entire industry that's very sophisticated in a particularly large scale of population, and how you can take all of that capacity building, partnership, collaboration, accountability, and implement it on a scale of a project. So it is a very large pilot project that you're talking about. And I think what sums it up very well is that there's a diversity in the management approaches with all the panelists. And I'd like with that to open up if there are any questions, and ask you as the audience to also allocate your questions to the specific person you're asking it to. Yeah.
Can you hear me? First of all, thank you so much for the outstanding diversity, as you said, in terms of how do you approach the decarbonizing our cities or our housing stocks. My question is, what is your experience in localizing SDGs? Because I think you know, we're all hearing. Oh, yeah, thank you, thank you, merci, boss. Yeah, so I'm really interested. Yeah, by the way, my name is Faisal Al Fadl. I'm from Saudi Green Building Forum. I'm an NGO accredited by UNEP as well. The idea of localizing SDGs, how far you guys have you know, have experience in this kind of like? Thank you.
You can. Okay.
That's everybody.
So this question is also quite difficult in terms of usually localization, whether in SDGs or to localize our strategic actions and vision. Usually this is a critical issue. We usually have good strategic action plan, but at the ground, because we have a number of restrictions, whether for social life or for economic aspects, etc. So back to your question about SDGs and localize of it at the local level. We already have a number of instruments or tools in order to. We have already defined our target to have our city, health city, safe and also resilient. In order to do that, we need to translate this huge terminology into a number of actions on ground, and to have a KPIs to monitor the implementation of this action. But usually you need like a successful best practices in order to scale up. So it's a kind, once again, strategy and SDGs come from top down, but you need to have some good exercise from bottom up. So this come from you have a successful model, and this can be replicated and scaling up this model for the majority of cities or the majority of cases. And we have in Egypt a number of good examples, whether if I'm talking about building, because buildings in Egypt have a different categories from informal areas, informal building till the formal ones. So accordingly, you need to have a different type of building have a success story, and this project representing or translated to some of the SDGs and then scaling up these initiatives.
Any other questions?
Maybe I ask a question. How long does it take to generalize an innovation in the building sector? Because we are very late in this agenda to decarbonize. So how do you think it takes time, 1 year, 10 years, 20 years, to have a decarbonized building sector in many countries? So.
I want to, in my experience, it will be easier to accelerate what we are already been doing if you want to map the dates that are already being put out. I do not believe that we will find in 4 years a way to accomplish the goals that have been set. So we have to accelerate what we are already been doing. Of course, that innovation will take a huge place in what concerns the years to come, but it's not feasible, in my point of view, in the government point of view, that in 4 years we will not only get to innovate, but the innovation will be implemented to get us to the point that we have to be in 4 years. So we are trying to put a lot of effort on the acceleration what is already on the field. And there is a lot of things already on the field. I think that we have to point that out. There is a lot of huge innovative discussions from 10 years ago that has not yet become a reality in what concerns the construction in our cities.
If I may, you kind of asked openly if you're asking for how long it takes to get it started, it's already started. If you ask for how to get it finished, it's taking another 20 years at least. If the last building project is entirely carbon neutral, and the beginning is the most difficult thing. I briefly mentioned supply and demand. If there is no demand for, let's say, carbon neutral cement, Holcim will talk about that, nobody will produce it. If there is no supply, nobody will ask for it. And that's where there is a key role for government activities. Number one, defining what's carbon neutral at all. There's different opinions on that, you know. And then to start that process of supply and demand meet. And in this, you can set goals, and the goals are basically set by the Paris Agreement. But you have to break them down to individual actions on building sites. And therefore, you need a step-by-step approach coming up with these means and tools and standards and supply and demand issue I was referring to. And then help this thing, that's at least our approach by subsidies. And so, because in the beginning, there is no fully stable business model, and finally come up with regulations if there is a certain phase reached of these things being mature. And we are in the midst of it as Germany, I must say.
Thank you very much. I mean, obviously, that's a great question because it tackles the minds of other. Oh, please.
Let me try with my English. From my point of view, it's not, for me, it's not a problem of time. I understand, and I know that it's very important because in our countries, in general, in Africa, for example, when we have raining, the impact is very important. But the question is, what is the economic change which is going with the necessary, the need of regarding the climate change? For example, for us, when you say we have to change the way of building the social houses, for example, it have to respect climate issues. It have a big impact on the economic way. At this moment, what our governments, what together we can do to be sure is that, for example, when in Côte d'Ivoire, when we'll change the way of building the social housing, the impact or the price of this housing can be always supported by our people. This is, for example, something very important for us. To say it more simply, it's good to say we have to change the way, we have to change our comportment, our way of living regarding the climate change, but at the same time we have to see what is the impact. Because when you're talking about the economic development, since those last 100 years, we have our youth to do all these things, you see. So when you're talking today about the climate change, it means that the factories, the material, all our economic system, you have to change it. You have to change it. This impact in our countries, the developing countries, is very important. So we have to see at the same time what is the impact, what we can do to look at the economic way, not just to say we have to change your way of living regarding the question of the climate. I think that if we do the same things together, we have more chance to reduce the time as you are talking.
Final comment. Usually when thinking about innovation at two levels, the construction of building and the operation of building, because it's easy to construct building in months, in a year, but again, it's a long process. I mean, we can't succeed in the innovation of material and design, but the operation lead to finally it's not efficient. So for the construction is quite easy, and we have already started in some countries. But the challenge, because you're dealing with an end user and different social aspects between the end user. So how to guarantee that the installation of, for example, solar panel, etc., will continue working in the home or in the house without change. So it's a kind of how to think about both of them together, and again, it's a long time process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is quite the question, Regis. Thank you. And I think it's obviously very clear that we have different pathways of approaching this, but at the end of the day, it's asking how long can people wait in conditions that are adequate or not adequate. And that's, I think, how the entire industry will change, shifting when we realize that people occupy these buildings, and climate change is a condition that is out of our control, but we have to repair, and that is our role. Thank you very much for the distinguished panel and your clarity and your contributions. Thank you. Ready with the slides? Okay. So thank you very much. And the second part of the panel, and for the people who just joined us in the room, we are talking about the transition to net zero. And the panel was established to talk first to panel number 1, which is the government and the stakeholders, and this is the second part of the panel to talk to the non-stakeholders. And I would like to invite on the panel Mr. Cedric Demius, Vice President and Group Public Affairs and Social Impact at Holcim, Mr. Guillaume Poitrinal, founder of WO2, Ms. Carmen Vogt, Head of Section Cities at GIZ BEEP, Mr. Omed Sabiri, IFC Edge and World Bank Group, and Ms. Regina Gontier, President of the International Union of Architects. So thank you very much for joining us, and it's the same run-through specific questions to each of you. I'd like to first start with Mr. Cedric. And are building material manufacturers, and you're from Holcim, ready to shift to carbon solutions and the benefits? And how do you couple, demand with innovation and also integrate affordability? And let us know your way of thinking and an example of what you're doing.
Great, thank you. I would need about 3.5 hours to fully answer the
No,
question.
you've
but
got 5 minutes.
I'll try to stick to 3 minutes.
5 minutes.
And of course, the answer is yes. You didn't expect any other answer, did you?
No.
So the answer is yes, and I will try to use 3 examples to try to illustrate what it means for us as an industrial company. Just looking at the way the North Star we've established, what it means for us is that we've committed, in the spirit of the Déclaration de Chaillot, we've committed to put on the market 8 million tons of fully decarbonized materials, cement and concrete included, on the market every year by 2030. So that's the North Star we've established. Of course, we're not waiting to 2030. We're acting now. And what we do, we've been focusing on our energy mix for our activities for many years. We go several steps further, and that's in the sense, Mr. Semaus, that you were talking. We're looking at new materials, new innovative materials. We're looking at new formulation. We look at waste that is lying in the cities, construction and demolition materials, which are resources available around the world. We're looking at new ways of buildings with the value chains, with architects, real estate developers, and so on. So let me give you an example. New materials. We start to work with a low-carbon material called calcined clay. Calcined clay is a readily available material globally. It allows us to produce a cement that is 50% less carbon intensive compared to the conventional cement. We're doing this today. This is available today. It's minus 50%. It's not minus 100 yet, but it's minus 50%. And we're doing it. We're producing it in France, in Italy, all the way to Mexico. And I hope my peers will be doing it in Brazil soon as well. So that's something that is happening today. Talking about recycling. We've used 8 million tons, and I know 8 million tons is very hard to picture, but it's a lot of material, of recycled materials. That allowed us in 2023 to launch in France a project called Récigénie, which is the first fully recycled concrete housing development. And it's not an experimental site. It's a 220 unit social housing complex built entirely with 100% recycled concrete, 100% recycling clinker, 100% recycled aggregates, 100% recycled sand, 100% recycled water. This was possible. It was launched. It's on the market, and I believe it's being moved in by inhabitants. This is happening today. Looking at new ways of building, we've been proudly collaborating on a project in a school, a large school, 1,500 children in Vienna. It's called the Bildungscampus. It was conceptualized with an advanced energy concept, where the idea was to heat that building for pupils, so it needs to be reliable, at a constant temperature, i.e. 20 degrees year-round, using zero fossil fuel, using zero combustion. And what the engineer did is to look at what Romans did a few centuries ago and create a thermal battery using renewable energy from the grid, feeding it to a heat pump that goes and get water, hot or cold water, depending on the season, stores it in the concrete mass of the building, and then you have a thermal battery. The impact of it, if you build that with low carbon concrete, it's a double whammy, but the impact is social as well as environmental. You have constantly equal social unit flats at a cost of 5 to 7 euros per square meter per year. That's less than your internet connection. So you are tackling energy poverty, tackling housing needs, and tackling the need to decarbonize the buildings that we build. If I had another half an hour, I would throw on top of it AI, digital technologies, computational design, which allows you to go several steps further. Yeah. But instead, I will just finish by addressing our fellow governments that we can put all of this on steroids. We're very good at working with the private sector. The projects that I've mentioned are largely private sector driven. You have a magic wand. It's called public procurement. And by integrating those kind of performance, including what you've explained you've done in Germany, what you've explained you're doing in Minas Gerais, this enables us to, this creates a demand. It's a demand pull policy, and we can deploy, and put it on steroids. So looking forward to collaborate with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I want to move on to Guillaume. And you're the founder of WO2. And, you know, you are a property developer who's moving very fast in green transition. And how can property developers be game changers? And what's your role in, you know, the decision-making process, the transition? So give us your take.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. The issue with all that is that finally the decision relies on the shoulder of the developer, whether public or private. So building material providers will not decide on the pace of the decarbonization of this industry, nor politicians. In the end, as a developer, you choose to go low carbon or you choose to go high carbon. So that's the first thing that we need to take in mind. My experience, having designed, launched, and being in the process of constructing or delivering something like 700,000 square meters of low carbon building, is that it is possible and it is not more expensive. How do we do that? The first thing is calculation. And I was amazed that on this discussion, nobody has talked about how do we calculate, what kind of metrics do we use, what is a low carbon building? A low carbon building is a building that divides by 2 the footprint, the carbon footprint over its life cycle, construction, operation, and of its life, recyclability. If you look at that seriously, and in France it happens that we have the first regulation that does calculate that, it's called RE 2020. If you calculate that, it means that you're going to put a number, you're going to put a CO2 weight on any building material that you need to integrate into your stuff. And you're going to make choices. Choices of sobriety, choices of do I keep this, do I keep that? How tall is my building? Tall buildings are not good generally for CO2 stuff. And then you have the building materials. And for a long period of time, we were not looking at the carbon content of cement. We were not looking at the carbon content of steel. We were using steel made with energy provided by coal and give them the same importance and the same weight as steel produced by energy coming from nuclear or solar plant or whatever. So we need to know. And the first thing that government bodies should explore is how do we agree on common parameters to define what is a low carbon building. We should not be able to have access to any building material without the carbon content. First thing. And we should agree on how do we calculate this carbon content, because I have a lot of respect for your industry and the progress which are being made, and it's essential for the planet, because we will always need concrete. But when I see that, not you, but some cement specialists are producing so-called low-carbon cement, burning tires, old tires, and saying that this is ecological because tires are waste. Sorry, not all waste should be burned. Full stop. Burning tires may be good for accounting and CO2 accounting. It's not good for the planet. It's not good for global warming. So I think we need to agree on that. Everything has to be put on the table. Everything has to be put on the table. And you are making outstanding progress. Having said that, there is an whole set of bio-sourced building materials, which happens to come from photosynthesis and which happens to have a negative carbon footprint. And this is primarily wood that can replace concrete, not in all categories, but in many categories. And we use a lot of wood. We put in frame about 40,000 cubic meter of wood every year in our program. And this is the first source of how to build low carbon. The second source is to use recycled material. The third source is to limit the amount of building material that we use. So we need from the politicians this referential, point number one. We need from the politicians, we need regulation being adapted to those new building materials. Today, you have regulations which have been the same one, all adapted for concrete. Okay, there is, in terms of safety, in terms of insulation, in terms of noise, everything has been designed for concrete. We need to accommodate all those new products that are coming from the biosourced building materials industry. We need to adapt our regulations quickly. A building made with wood is not necessarily dangerous from a fire standpoint. It depends how it is built. It depends what kind of device you have in case you have a fire in terms of extinguishment. Is it sprinklage? Is it whatever? It's not necessarily a dangerous building. And I've known dangerous concrete building. So we need that. And lastly, if I'm under time pressure, and lastly, we need some kind of finance, because we need finance to make sure that the cement industry is decarbonizing. And I understand from the press that you have billions of public money in Europe going to carbon credit to help this industry. And we need to have the same billions going to innovation, going to startups, going to those that are going to provide us with low carbon building materials. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would have given you another minute, because you had a wish list for government and financiers. So I would have given you another minute. Ms. Carmen, I wanted to ask, as head of the section for cities at GIZB, what is the business case for you, and how do you propagate the business case for net zero and resilient buildings, and what are the inherent social benefits of all of this?
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much for inviting me and sharing with you the perspective of international development cooperation, and also sharing one of the practical projects and experiences. Yes, you were asking for a business case. For me, the business case for near zero and resilient buildings is clear. In general, if we consider the overall costs of a building over its lifetime, only about a fifth is spent on design and construction. The largest part of the costs is generated by its operating costs for energy, for maintenance, and the renewable of equipment as the air conditioning system, heat production, or construction renovation on the building stock. Within the framework of the PEEP program, PEEP stands for the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. It's a multi-stakeholder project between French and German and other supporters. We were able to show how the performance of a building can be improved massively. And this is really impressive. An additional investment of 3 to 7% can achieve energy savings up to 60% in the case of new constructions and up to 40% in the case of renovations. And that means that these buildings are more efficient, more comfortable, and less expensive to operate. Even though the business case is clear, the question also remains in this case how we mobilize the additional upfront investment. And within the PEEP project, we have an excellent instrument to achieve this by supporting large-scale public and private projects with a transformative character and high climate mitigation and adaptation potential. We do this through the investment facility implemented by the French AFD. And this facility provides financial and technical assistance to public and private sub-project owners. And another part of this activity is the support of governments in designing financial incentives, a mechanism implemented by national funds or banks that can provide this extra incentive to invest only a small percentage more at the beginning and have the benefit later. This is done via a so-called enabling facility that is implemented by GIZ, German Development Corporation, and which supports the transformation of the building sector through sectoral frameworks, policies, and trainings. So I would underline that there is a very strong link to the buildings breakthrough and the ministerial declaration, and the program's activities of PEEP contribute to the different areas of the buildings breakthrough and making near zero and resilient buildings bi-normal by 2030. And I would also end with another statement with reference to the social and economic impacts. Within German Development Corporation in general, we strive for a real and inclusive building transition that combines the goal of poverty reduction and informality with our agenda for zero carbon buildings. And therefore, we do not only address or to implement the long-term regulatory roadmaps and frameworks, the building and energy codes for all buildings, and appropriate financial net frameworks. Of course, this part is very, very important, but we also work to enhance skills and capacity building at all levels by strengthening the national and local know-how and ensuring also that working conditions are protected and enhanced by mitigation and adaptation strategies. So we also have to consider that most of the people most affected by climate change are living in vulnerable areas, and this is also the majority or the major part of the demand for building and also construction. One very last point, creating social benefits means also creating jobs in the construction industry and enhancing the knowledge and skill, as mentioned before. And this also supports the startups and businesses that produce low-cost carbon building materials and to bring these on the market. This is also a very important approach in our work, and all of this is essential from our point of view for a sustainable building sector and the construction of a just city and to leave no one behind. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ahmed from the IFC and World Bank Group, what is your role as a market accelerator for green construction?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to give you one example, and this example is, I want to start this example with a person, a family. Let's assume the family name is Jose Rodriguez. He lives in one of small areas in Colombia, and he doesn't have a house, right? This guy is moving to a new affordable home. The house price is around $40,000, and he's getting a mortgage for this $40,000. In this, he's earning roughly around $400 per month, and he needs to pay half of that, the salary for mortgage, okay? And he needs to pay roughly around $60 for his bills, okay? $60 is going to bills, $200 going to the mortgage. What we have done is that we have created a process by EDGE certification for him that his utilities will be saved almost by $30. So he's saving almost $30 on his utilities per month. He's also getting a mortgage that the mortgage is cheaper than a normal mortgage. So he's also saving on his mortgage payment, monthly mortgage payment. So imagine in that scenario when you're that person and you're saving on your utilities, you're saving on your mortgage, and your house is a better quality house, you're a winner. Now let's move on one step up. The developer, you mentioned about development. The developer puts roughly 1% to 2% extra to make this house better house in Colombia. This is a real example. And that developer is also getting a better financing from the bank with the lower interest for construction finance. So developer is also winning because he can sell more, and his buyers are getting green mortgage, so they are also buying more of these homes. So the developer also wins here. When you come one step higher, banks that are providing financing are also winning because banks are providing more and more financing to green buildings. They're also issuing green bonds. They are getting international finance coming with the better rates. The banks are also winning in this game. One step forward, architects, engineers, industries, they're also creating more jobs. We had women entrepreneurs that they created jobs, created companies that they now have 10 to 15 employees. They're all working on this green building certification process, EDGE certification process. So they're also winning. And actually the woman that I mentioned is in Brazil, and I'm happy to introduce who is doing this in Brazil. Governments are also winning here because in Colombia, the savings that we estimated is roughly 2,000 gigawatt hours of energy saved per year, a large number of water saving per year that they don't need to provide infrastructure to, right? Otherwise, as a government, you have to provide infrastructure, and that's very expensive to build. So what we have achieved in Colombia and how we achieved this, there is VAT reduction on cost of materials. There is also Association of Construction Engineers that they are working with the developers to develop these programs. IFC, we invested in one or two banks, roughly around $400 million. But now there are 6 banks that they provide this kind of financing for different players. What we achieved in 7 years. You mentioned 4 years may be hard to achieve. In 7 years, what we have achieved, last year we had 30% of all new buildings in Colombia, all of them were EDGE certified. The total 15 million square meters of projects certified, and we have 19 million square meters of projects in the pipeline to certify. So, almost more than what we have achieved in 5 years is in the pipeline to get certified. So it shows that the market is moving very fast. We also have done roughly 220,000 housing units certified. That means that 220,000 families like Jose would live in a better life, okay? And that means that is possible, that is an impact on their livelihoods. So that's our story. And this story can be repeated in Brazil, can be repeated in Egypt, can be repeated in Côte d'Ivoire, and everywhere else. Possibly in Germany as well. I mean, Germany has been much more advanced in this senses, but we can create these kind of programs that benefits the bottom of the families. And most of these numbers that I gave you are social or low-income housing. This is not the top high-end office towers, glossy buildings. They are very, very basic houses. Thank you very
Thank
much, and
you.
I give
Thank
it
you.
back to you.
And last but not least, Mr. Regina, you know, we want to ask, definitely, are architects ready for all of this? You know, and 5 minutes, you know, pour your heart out, please.
Well, as architects, we are very much aware that, that the responsibility for the environment and the future of humanity is a matter of shared social, ethical, and political responsibility amongst governments, public and private sector, civil society, and of course, professionals. Considering the global impact of our built environment, the solution cannot only be green buildings, but must also be green practices, green policies, and green procurement. The discussion, though, should be about green built and living environment to include people and culture. High-quality bioculture, I refer to the Davos Declaration of 2018, propagates a holistic approach and puts culture on center stage in order to achieve sustainable and vibrant communities with a better quality of life and well-being for all. It is about quality as a long-term value. And there are many misunderstandings about quality. It doesn't mean expensive, and it doesn't mean luxury. Against the challenges of sustainability and climate change, it is our duty to advocate for the best solutions of the built environment while improving the quality of life. Our collective approach must be multidimensional, respecting culture, society, identity, nature, biodiversity, and humanity, advocating for responsible land use and settlements, energy efficiency, and for the use of durable construction materials and methods during the whole life cycle in harmony with local culture. As architects, we are trained to coordinate the know-how of other disciplines and specialists, to use technology intelligently, and to find solutions within the given economic and legal framework and within the given technologies. As designers, within the interdisciplinary team, we are, though, the only specialists challenged to understand the needs of both users and investors and interpret them in spatial solutions in the interest of society. And for that, we are always ready. The stakeholders of the building sector must prioritize quality in policy and investment decisions and recognize that high-quality baukultur supports sustainable economic growth while improving the resilience and livability of our natural and built environment. The strategy for resilience must be a multi-phased one, moving towards zero-emissions buildings whilst understanding the need for different approaches in different climates and different cultures, fostering collaboration to ensure that solutions are scalable and adaptable. Energy efficiency must become a top priority by employing passive design techniques and renewable energy, by valuing traditional know-how, by incorporating robust materials and technologies to endure environmental challenges. Resilient building has evident competitive benefits like significant savings in operating expenses and greater property value. Near zero and resilient buildings provide businesses with both financial rewards and strategic advantages. In particular, building sustainably will provide social benefits. It will offer safer and more resilient living environments, increasing the health and productivity of inhabitants and advancing social inclusion. And now, as Federation of National Professional Organizations working to influence public policies and advance architecture in the service to the needs of society, the UIA, the International Union of Architects, will perform its role in its global endeavor and will continue engaging in climate diplomacy, lobbying for policy changes to support sustainable building practices and the retrofitting of existing structures for better energy efficiency, promoting capacity and information sharing, working on public engagement and awareness by supporting global campaigns about the importance of zero emissions and resilient buildings. And we will develop guidelines for architects that integrate principles of zero emissions and resilience into the design and the construction process for all stages. We will do our share in promoting sustainable architecture that is resilient, cost-effective, and beneficial for societies around the globe. But let us not forget that sustainability requests a holistic approach, and the solution cannot be just buildings. And neglect, for instance, urban planning and land use. The problem starts there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very diverse conversation. If I were to sum up, you know, what Cedric, you started off with, and there's something very beautiful that you are moving very quickly forward. You have integrated digitization, AI, but you referenced that one of the solutions for one of your projects was a historic solution, you know, embedded in indigenous and local knowledge. And that's fantastic that you are, you know, working towards merging and exploring this. Guillaume, your point is also more, I think, about expanding mindsets, you know, that we have very rigid systems and, you know, ratings and codes in place, and they need to move faster. They need to move faster with what is being rolled out in terms of creativity, research and development, innovation. And at the end of the day, we need measurable mechanisms, because that is the universal language when you come to measure that can, you know, I think in my sector as an architect can actually speak to more than one sector or one profession and can transcend communication issues. You know, it took 70 years to define what is sustainable development, and I don't think we have 70 years to define what is a green building at all. Carmen, what you are talking about is, you know, the not just the social aspect, but thinking beyond what the green building delivers into job creation, into the informal sector, into integrating, you know, livelihoods and mobilizing the investment to understand how complex the green building and the built environment is. Omid, the blended finance, I would call it, and these tailored solutions that can fit various contexts, you know, is very important, and it is working. I know it's working in Egypt, because you are able to tailor fit and design models for financing and collaborations that fit into different economic emerging and developed markets. So this is an important thing to have. And then finally, Regina, you're definitely hitting the nail on the head when you are talking about beyond the building, you know, and this holistic measure of what it is that we're trying to do. And it calls for me to say that everything here, again, and we just said this on a panel earlier this morning, is not taught in the education of architecture. So if we were to come up with one thing, I definitely would, you know, call for revisiting how we teach architects to make buildings, because it's oblivious. So thank you very much. And if there are any questions in the audience, please raise your hands.
Yeah, thank you. My question is for Guillaume. I really liked your comment around the need to need to measure and have data. My question is, how do we trust the data that we have? Because I note you mentioned on the difference between net and gross, but like when I have a look to do the calculations, I see these same discrepancies with other ones. I mean, you spoke about timber, but when I look at the PCRs in the background and the calculations, you know, there's discrepancies there along the lines of net gross, where if it's in Europe, it's automatically sustainably, you know, managed at a country level. So regardless of where it came from, it just gets deemed as zero. And same with engineered timber, where we get the energies in the heating. If it's used biomass, automatically zero, but if that biomass isn't sustainably sourced. So how do we trust the data? That's my question. How do we make sure that what we're seeing and the ways to measure are correct?
I think it's a very good question. You know, I wrote a book, and in this book I say that the large companies are going to save the world. So I have all the left-wing people saying that's not true. The large companies cannot save the world. I think the multinationals are going to save the world. I've been running a big company before in the past. And if you are the CEO of a large company, you don't want to lie, and certainly not on the environmental issues. So you're going in good faith to calculate things in good faith. And if someone, like we did, calls you and say in your declaration of carbon footprint, Mr. Cement Producer, not Holcim, you put that the sand comes from 30 kilometers from my Paris site. Can you explain where there is a sand reservoir, you know, that provides sand 30 kilometers away from my site? And they say, okay, no, this is a mistake. And they have corrected that in the fiche declarative of their carbon footprint of their building material. So we are going to make progress. We must trust ourselves. Let's put on the table, not everybody wants to lie. Everybody wants to optimize, but not everybody wants to lie. So I would trust those companies, and then I would organize control in the German way, or sometimes the French way. The French are very good for controlling. They have plenty of civil servants. And I'm sure they will be delighted to come in your factory and say, are you sure this energy is being provided by this or that? Are you sure your trucks comes, etc., etc.? Eventually, we can rely also on the CO2 energy, the CO2 content for energy. Electricity, we know approximately if you have a plant in Germany, in Switzerland, in Italy. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you have the mix of electricity, you have the carbon content of electricity for almost each country. So this is something we have, and then everybody has to calculate, you know, element by element, the real carbon footprint of the product which is being delivered. It can be a ton of cement, it can be a glass here, it can be anything, because everything we do has a transcription into carbon footprint, and we need to work on everything.
Can I just add one thing which will not really answer to your question, but I'm always really annoyed by this discussion on different materials and timber versus concrete and steel, and in my opinion, it really doesn't matter. Because the decarbonized agenda is not about those materials. It's about what you said. It's about defining the right metric. Whatever we build, what makes it 1.5 degree aligned? And how do we measure with the same standard what the performance, the whole life carbon performance that building needs to achieve? And then we will compete on the market. I have a solution, you have a solution, and in the end, it doesn't matter if it's in concrete, in glass, or in timber. Yes. And you create through that, and it's a little bit the spirit that Mr. Krestas, you said, the framework you've put in place in Germany is material neutral, is based on whole life cycle, and that generates innovation basically in the market.
We can't have the discussion, but we have one more time for any other questions? Okay, then have a 2-minute discussion.
Then I can tell you that we can achieve, I can't agree more. The question in the end is a question of number. It's not a question of building materials, it's a question of number. We managed today to divide by 2 the CO2 consumption, the CO2 emission over the life cycle of a building with those new technology. From 1,400 kilo equivalent CO2 per square meter to about 700. And we need to get to 0. Okay, we all agree on that. We've divided by 2 the carbon content without increasing too much the cost. We believe that our cost is 50 euro per square meter more expensive than a regular standard all-type building. And because also we use a low carbon cement, which is more expensive than a regular cement. That's for sure. We use wood, which is more expensive than regular cement. So but it is possible. And there is an association that now is being launched called the Low Carbon Initiatives, of which the objective is to provide a common format, a common concept throughout Europe for calculating the carbon footprint of any building. And I think we should all be members of this LCBI stuff, because I think we need to speak the same language. We have common metrics, we have common kilograms, common kilometers, and we need to have a common way of calculating the CO2 emissions of those buildings.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank all the panelists. Thank you very much for this great discussion, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was very fun.
That's my fight. Huh? For 10 years.